Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnie Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my guest from America. Welcome, Mark Anderson.
Great to be back, Arnie.
No worries. Pleased to have you, Mark. I'm just going to cut across to Mark's website, thetruthhound.com, and where you'll be able to find current thoughts that Mark is laying out for the public. Very important, and in particular, what we're going to talk about is this work by Mr. Oliver Haydorn at the Social Credit, socred.org website, and it's in regard to the proposed ABC Act to full-fledged Douglas social credit. Very interesting article, and it is the basis of our forum today. So, Mark Anderson, you've got the floor.
Great to have it. Yes, this act, the ABC Act, the Automatic Boost to Communities Act, excuse me, is a bill in the U.S. Congress. It's been languishing there for a little while, and the idea is that it would build, Arnie, it would build on the temporary stimulus that President Trump and the Congress passed into law and actually paid out to most of the American people in the midst of the COVID-19 response. Given the depression of the small business economy, given the huge layoffs that are almost rivaling the Great Depression of the late 1920s, what happened was $2,400 per family for jointly filing couples, married couples who file their federal income taxes jointly. They received $2,400 per household, and then individuals received $1,200 US dollars per person as part of the restoring of the purchasing power that was lost when this record number of businesses were closed and record number of jobs were either slowed down or shut down, again, amid this, what many say is an overreaction to the COVID-19 phenomenon. So the ABC Act then starts where that Trump stimulus left off and would give $2,400, or excuse me, let me rephrase that, would give $2,000 up front to individuals and then $1,000 from there on out. And the article that Oliver Haydorn, the author of Social Credit Economics, posted at the website that you just cited will give listeners the details that want to look at it further. But basically, it would go about a year from when President Trump declared a COVID-19 national emergency, which was around March 13th of 2020. Let me get my month straight. And it would extend about a year beyond that, if not longer. It gets a little convoluted in some of its provisions. And again, I would encourage viewers to go to Oliver's article and get most of the nitty-gritty details that are in the actual bill.
Yeah, no, this is a fascinating consideration that governments are able to, if you like, come up with funds when it's necessary. Here they are, so fiscally tight, so fiscally tight, so fiscally tight, and here they are able to, if you like, fabricate out of thin air. And of course, if we look at credit creation, we can actually consider that as a bona fide. This is what actually does happen, but that you've got the potential for a continuous provision of funds like a dividend issued to each family and each individual who files a tax return so that they can at least be in a position of sustainability. I find that an interesting consideration, that the basic provisions, the necessities of life are there as an issue. The only question, Mark, that I need to place on the table is one of the source of the funds. If it's from taxes or if it's from new credit, be it new credit, then that's probably a good thing, providing the new credit is an issue of new money that is debt free. Your thoughts, Mark?
Yes, exactly. I asked Oliver that as we went over his article detail by detail, because I happen to cover the U.S. Congress semi-regularly for miscellaneous news outlets, including my own. And as we went over that, Oliver confirmed to me that interestingly enough, the U.S. Treasury would issue special high value platinum coins and file them evidently as a surety with the private central bank, the Federal Reserve. And upon the value of those coins and their issuance, the money, as according to Oliver's research, would in fact be created as a sovereign act by the U.S. Congress, free of debt. It would not be borrowing, and it would not be a fiscal project. In other words, the U.S. government would not dip into the tax till to tap into already taxed money, existing revenue, to rob from Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. That wouldn't happen either. So, absent that and absent borrowing, this special platinum coinage evidently would enable, consistent with the U.S. Constitution, would enable Congress to issue the money as a sovereign act, free of interest, free of debt. That is one of the huge parts of the ABC Act on the good side of the ledger. It does have weaknesses and questions. And the other good side of the ledger you just outlined, Arnie, and that is that it shows that government, other than acting in a time of war, which is one of those rare times when all of a sudden government has all the money in the world, this is another time where government is showing, as they showed with the first Trump stimulus, now with the proposed ABC Act, they're showing that they can, in fact, efficiently and relatively easily get money in the hands of individuals to make up for the endemic inherent shortfall in our defective economy, where production and prices and output, productive output, always outpaces and overcomes and is much more than the wages paid out to individuals and salaries paid out during that same production process. So that gap, according to relatively recent figures, was like 21, 22 trillion in production, but only about 11 trillion, roughly half of that, being paid out in wages and salaries in the United States of America, according to US figures that are maybe a year or two old. So you can see there's that huge 10 or 11 trillion dollar gap. We do need more liquidity, more purchasing power in the economy, not as a dole, not as socialist welfare, but to actually fix a specific defect that is endemic and has been there a long time, dragging down the economy and hobbling it and making it like a one-legged man that can barely walk down the street. So the ABC Act, on the good side of the ledger, carries a number of promising provisions. In fact, Oliver is calling it embryonic social credit. And Oliver would not say that casually. It would take a lot to get Oliver to say that, but he's calling this social credit in embryo, or the embryonic stages.
Yeah, no, that's a an excellent summary of Oliver's article. I think that's really, really important. I will be providing a link below this video on the website so that you can actually chase it up for yourself and read it to do the scholastic work necessary to mutter this thought in your mind that the government is issuing, as a sovereign act, is issuing new credits in the form of this supplement to families and individuals. And I would consider that if this is a new credit, then of course the rate of descent into irredeemable debt would be reduced. So it would demonstrate directionally that it is the correct method, and that is the rate of descent would be less. The rate of ascent of debt would be less. It would be not as great. And those to me are phenomena that you need to look for. You've actually got to consider, if you like, the what is real, the real world that's actually going on, and money itself is an abstraction. The real world is that we have more than enough productive capacity. Industry is there. Farmers are there to sell the food. They're struggling to sell what they produce because the cash flow has actually stopped, instantly stopped as a consequence of this COVID-19. You're right, Mark. Overreaction. I think it is an overreaction, hugely overreacted. And what they've done is they've shown their hand. These considerations, and of course you've got other considerations, and that is the behind the scenes. I understand Alan Brown is highlighting that banks are still being bailed out even now. And that to me says that the whole financial economic system is in disarray on what's actually going on. And this is a significant potential to rethink what the financial system is there for, and at the same time to consider. Now, America has gone through some difficult times in its history, and it's had its amendments put in place to the Constitution because it wasn't, as if you like, in a state of equilibrium as it should be between the people and government. And I would suggest that in regard to the well-being of the people, that they need to actually reconsider their constitution as well as their finances in this whole time of flux. This whole time of flux, it really is a time to open the books once again and look at how the arrangement between the people. In Australia, our constitution begins with "we the people." It's an agreement between ourselves, and we've got to recognise that that's an agreement between the people and how to be governed. And so if the government is out of order, or it's not doing what it should do, if it's not being, if you like, a time of plenty, and yet here we are, we've got rows and rows of homeless people and suffering, and we've actually got to bring them into the equation. We can't cut them loose and discount them. These homeless people are suffering, and they have as much inherent right to this vast mountains of produce as every other person in society. It's a new narrative. It's a time of plenty. It's a time of doing to your brother as you would have him do unto you. Your thoughts, please, Mark.
Yeah, I'll start with your last comment, Arnie. Indeed, it is like the Sermon on the Mount by our Savior Jesus Christ, that he said that we have a new covenant now, and that covenant is, mushy though it may sound, brotherly love, that our
Right.
fellow human is our brother or sister, and that we cannot just disregard them in some callous, um, redux to the old world, to the Old Testament, to the old ways. We have to stop brutalizing each other. We have to have compassion and actually have what Douglas himself called applied Christianity. Although Douglas was maybe not a preacher in the full sense, like Eberhard, the social credit governor of Alberta, Canada, once upon a time, Douglas did see that social credit had a component within it, inherent within it, that was what he called applied Christianity. And therefore, it would bring about kind of the loaves and fishes look at the world, where there is a outlook or worldview that we have plenty, that we are not suffering from severe shortages, that the world is not in a state of constant, um, drastic shortages. In fact, it is a bountiful world. Um, I will say there's a caveat, and that is due to COVID-19 and the arbitrary and capricious shutdowns by government, the existing productive might of the US, Canada, and other countries has been cut down. And so, with that lower production, we would have to adjust the dividend automatically to account for that. But social credit properly applied, which the ABC Act could eventually morph into, would account for these fluctuations in production and consumption. That would all be accounted for whenever consumption or production goes up or down. But the thing is that when you look at it, like I looked into the meat industry, there was a lot of claims of food shortages. And I talked to a big time meat expert, Bill Bullard of RCAF, a cattle industry and meat industry advocacy group in the United States based in Montana. And Bill said there's no shortage of meat production. The problem is monopoly. And with monopoly, you have only 4 major companies controlling the flow of most beef and other meat, poultry, pork, and whatnot in the United States. And that affects Canada and Mexico to a point. And so these 4 companies that run the whole show control the supply and distribution chains, and they have too few of meat packing plants open. It should be a redundant, robust system where we have smaller meat packing plants and smaller meat packing companies, not a monopoly of 4. And then we would have no problem with our already existing large scale production of meat. the bottleneck is created by too few companies being in charge, running too few meatpacking plants, and then there's bottlenecks created. And all that has to happen is COVID-19 come along, close down one or two meatpacking plants, probably unnecessarily or needlessly, and then you have what appears to be a meat shortage when all it is a processing bottleneck because there's not enough plants and you have a monopoly of four running the whole show. See, so production is down, but it's not always actual production being down, but it's monopoly, and monopoly is created by the defective monetary system that we have in the first place. If we had a more equitable social credit style system, we wouldn't have all these monopolies in media. We wouldn't have all these monopolies in food processing. And we wouldn't have all these monopolies in many other areas of the economy. And you would have a more robust system. So if you do have a natural disaster or a pandemic or something else come along, there'd be plenty of resilience in the system, and you would scarcely even notice a reduction in production. And
Yes.
so I thought that was important to address as well.
Absolutely, that's very well put. That monopolies actually cause bottlenecks, and if a system is to be robust, and in Australia, our big ticket items are power generation and water, and the water supply, and of course we've got, if you like, monopolies on both of those. Yes, a very few players who totally influence the whole industry. And of course, historically, Australia it has actually, as natural resources, got significant coal reserves scattered around Australia. They've got natural gas reserves all over Australia. We've got crude oil reserves, again, significant amounts. And the thing is that means that power generation should be localised so that there is no catastrophic failure. We've had it here in South Australia. We've had state blackouts where the whole state has gone black because we've lost one boiler, one big power generation boiler, and it is ridiculous that our governments consider this is the best way to go. Now, in regard to we're talking about this essentially a social payment, and considering the COVID-19, it's fascinating to watch the in Australia we call it the Therapeutic Goods Association. It's a private-public partnership of industry, and they're advocating, as a consequence of their marketing policy, they're advocating vaccine as the only answer to health. And of course, my point of view on that is, of course, this is just another monopoly, and it's being exploited to the hilt in this current circumstances to increase market share. It's the very opposite of what should be happening. Individuals should be able to, firstly, make their own choices as to how they treat their body, and they should be able to take other points of view, other advocates, listen to other advocates, and not just one narrative. And of course, with the problems you've got in America, it appears as if there is only one narrative, and with mainstream media, um, if you like, endorsing that one narrative, of course, you never hear others. So to me, there's huge opportunities to deconstruct monopolies. This really is a time, an opportunity to open up the books and go through this whole thing all over again, to review what has historically directionally gone on and the inordinate influences that particular individuals and minority groups have over government. And I know that the in Australia the consideration, we've got a Professor Geoffrey Walker, and he wrote a book called Citizens Initiative Referenda. Um, and it's a fascinating proposal because it gives the potential. I know in some American states they have it. I think in the 90s, California had a tax revolt, I think, if I remember it rightly. And it was through the referenda recall. They were able to actually stop that tax being implemented. These are very important principles. Social credit, in a sense, is about the science of how people get on, how they actually achieve an increment in association, and it's measured in terms of human satisfaction. It doesn't mean that you're happy and giddy. It means that you're satisfied with the result. Now, there is no recall mechanism for your politicians nor ours. There's no recall mechanism for your judges nor ours, and nor your bureaucrats nor ours. And to me, these are the very things that we need to consider. not only being able to block unacceptable legislation like the mandatory vaccine proposal, but also to call representatives to account before the people at the drop of a hat. If they're on the payroll, then they should be subject to recall. I know this is out on left field, but to me these are serious considerations. When we talk about social credit, when we talk about reform, we've got to measure all of these things in terms of human satisfaction. And that is what the science of social credit is. It responds to the financial economic system with a national dividend proposal. And that's a very solid consideration. But it's actually the whole big picture that we have to look at. Your thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, that's a big tapestry there. Yeah, social credit is supposed to put humankind mastering over money rather than money mastering over humankind. We can't forget the fundamentals. As C.H. Douglas, the conceiver of social credit, said, systems are made for men, not men for systems. And we have our world inverted where we serve a system rather than the system serving us. And yes, a corollary of that is having accountable representation throughout legislatures and throughout the courts and in the bureaucracies, as you're saying. In the United States, there is some provision for recall at the local level, cities, villages, townships, to a degree. Sometimes ballot initiatives can be reversed, things like that. But as you get up the ladder past the county into the state and federal levels in the US and most, if not all, other countries, maybe Switzerland with its direct democracy would be sometimes a exception. But yes, as you get through most of these state and federal levels, you have a situation where they say, well, the election, that's how you get rid of the bad politicians. Just wait till the next election and vote them out. But another one of the branches of the existing monopolies is electronic voting machines that can be internally rigged through their proprietary software to flip an election. And that's something a lot of people don't want to talk about, even in the alternative media. But I came up with a kind of a rough formula. I call it M3, Arnie, like a big M, small 3, like an equation: monetary, media, and medical. The three M's, or M3: the medical mafia or monopoly, the media mafia or monopoly, and the big granddaddy of them all, the one that makes everything work the wrong direction, and that's the money monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
Without the money monopoly, you wouldn't have the media or the medical monopolies, and you wouldn't have this COVID-19 vaccine concept being shoved down our throat
Yeah.
or into our arm. And so, one of the things about the existing monetary dispensation that social credit would overturn, and hopefully the ABC Act is embryonic toward that overturning, is that it perverts everything. So it tells you that the only way to make money is that you have to constantly produce things that you may not need. You constantly have to do something. You can't just receive any kind of natural flow of money through natural law as part of your inheritance, your increment of human association. You're part of the cultural heritage, a God-given inherent free-born thing, not something you have to earn through some perverse Puritanism. No, you can't do that. So the world tells you you have to do something. So naturally, you're going to have plutocrats and robber barons who are going to come up with schemes and weird, perverse ideas, because the world tells you, Arnie, you have to do something. You have to bend nature against your, according to your will. You have to pervert human relations. You have to sell potions and snake oil, and you have to come up with pharmaceutical drugs, not just one drug, but one drug after another after another. You constantly have to rob or deceive or swindle your neighbor. If that's necessary, you'll do it. But you constantly have to put products on the market, whether they improve the human condition or not, because you constantly have to do something to make money. Money is not a natural free-flowing thing like air and water, like it should be. So it naturally it takes the weaker people among us, those with less scruples, those with weaker moral compositions, weaker moral constitutions, and it induces them to commit crime and harm. And it's the natural thing to do. The defective system we have invites tyranny. It induces wrongdoing. It induces dishonesty and swindling. That's how the system works. The system that we need to overturn needs dishonesty. It needs criminal behavior to even operate because it is itself a criminal system. Criminal systems require criminals to run them. We're surprised we have tyrants and ne'er-do-wells like Bill Gates that wants to jab a needle in everybody's arm. It disturbs me too. The guy should go to prison for 1,000 years. But what else would you expect with a system like this, Arnie? It's a system that can only run and be run by tyrants.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a fascinating observation, Mark. And that's exactly right. That we can actually design systems to achieve certain purposes, and we can actually design systems to achieve the good. And that's what the advocacy of social credit national dividend consumer price discount is about. It's actually to achieve the good, measured in terms of human satisfaction. It's designed to achieve that. A constitution originally conceived is to achieve the good. It's to achieve an agreement between the governed and the government, between the two, an
Right.
agreement and an imbalance. And of course, you've got to always place these things to the fore. When you have totalitarianism, we've seen it. It doesn't matter whether it's Mao, whether it's Stalin, whether it's Hitler, whatever. Nowadays, what we're looking at is an elected dictatorship. And this is why I say we need to throw the books open. We need to actually review these things and reconsider the good. How can we achieve the good? And I always put that in the forefront of your mind because that's what social credit means. It means measured in terms of human satisfaction to achieve the good. So I think it's fascinating, Mark. Today's forum has been excellent. I'm just going to do a run around on the websites that we've looked at. Now we've got here social credit, socred.org. That's Oliver Haydorn's. Mark Anderson's The Truth Hound, and there's also another. Oh, excuse me, I haven't cut across. Okay, The Truth Hound. There it is, Oliver Haydorn's Social Credit, socred.org, and there is also republicbroadcasting.org. And there is a fourth one that was brought up, and that is this World Impact News. And I'm just going to ask you to explain the World Impact News, Mark, and your thoughts and closing comments, please.
Yeah, worldimpactnews.net goes hand in hand with my blog, thetruthhound.com. World Impact News is the newest kid on the block. I do it with Pastor Jason Mangum, a very courageous American preacher
Hmm.
and a very good political analyst in his own right, and a heck of a video producer. As you see, when you go to worldimpactnews.net and click on watch or news, watch will bring you videos, news will bring you articles and petitions and different things. But it's a very action-oriented site. The site was created about 2 months ago, and I encourage people to check it out. There is an older video in the archive there called Christianomics, where I do give a basic summation of social credit, not real in depth, but we called it Christianomics just to give an introductory feel for social credit. So check that out. And yeah, across these news sites, I cover a lot of things, think tanks and the Global Cities Movement and the Bilderberg Group, and a
Hmm.
lot of interesting things for people of different political persuasions. But monetary reform is one of my specialties. I don't write about it real frequently, but when I do deal with it, I like to deal with it very seriously, like we're doing today on your show, Arnie.
Yeah.
And I think my closing thoughts would be that no matter what other issue you might have in mind, we have to tackle out of that M3 equation I mentioned earlier, medical, media, and monetary. We have to tackle the monetary thing. As you say, Arnie, we have to open the books of our respective countries, force them open if we have to, meaning we have to be very insistent and say, look, this just isn't going to wash. This debt here was not legitimately arrived at to begin with. This debt is illegitimate, therefore it should be canceled or repudiated. people that have bought savings bonds, they can be reimbursed in other ways. We need to, in some ways, wipe the slate clean, in other ways, make pretty drastic alterations. But COVID-19, for all the downside, the potential medical tyranny, the lockdowns, some sort of vaccine tagging or tattooing, all these things that could come down on the dark side can be headed off at the pass and warded off and canceled if we make the right, primarily monetary decisions the way we're talking today. We want to make sure that the ABC Act, which has a lot of promising aspects, embryonic social credit, as Oliver calls it, we need to make sure that doesn't get steered the wrong direction. There is the thorny question, because right now the bill calls for giving the payments also to illegal aliens and undocumented people in America, not just American citizens and not just legal residents that carry a green card. I'm okay with citizens, I'm okay with legal residents and green card holders, but I too have questions about giving the dividend, if you want to call it that, to undocumented people. That's going to make it tough to get past the U.S. Senate and very tough to get Trump's signature, that one provision. To give an honest and complete assessment of the ABC Act, we cannot overlook that, and we don't want it to be steered off to where it becomes a condition for getting vaccinated, to where we have some sort of weird credit system where you only get it and you're only allowed to travel and engage in most commerce if you're vaccinated and you prove it with your vaccine implant or tattoo. We don't want any of that dystopian stuff, and that's not apparently in the bill right now. We don't want that tagging or vaccine-related coercion to get added to the bill later. And again, we have the undocumented citizen or undocumented persons provision there that's going to raise a lot of questions. To make sure we're getting a complete look at this bill, the good side, the bad side, whatever. But in the main, overall, I think it's a promising bill, Arnie. It contains that embryonic element of social credit that we need to build on and get these books open and get our respective nations in order before the banksters who stole that monetary power from the governments and intervene to disrupt the constitutional compact between the people and their governments. It's largely the banksters that have done this through the private central banking system and their commercial satellites. We need to end that improper, corrosive intervention that they've carried out, restore trust between people and their governments, open the books, and move forward into a new civilization of the right kind that C.H. Douglas talked about and foresaw.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that summary, Mark. That's very well put. A new narrative, a new relationship between the people and their government, and to reset debt, essentially the year of Jubilee. These are all
Yes.
historical events. These are not unprecedented. They've been done before because money has been a tool of tyrants for eons. David Graeber's book, I think it's something like 5,000 years of debt, and it shows that it's been a tool of tyrants all that time. And Douglas' proposal in regard to national dividend consumer price discount puts that to bed, puts it to bed, wrestles it to the ground, which is what we have to do. There is much work to do, and there is much faith to generate. And be pleased that yesterday was the Ascension, celebrating the Ascension, and on the 31st of May is Pentecost. This is a time of receiving the Holy Spirit. It's a beautiful time in the Christian calendar to be regenerated and to rethink our commitment to bring God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Thank you so much, Mark Anderson.
Great conclusion, Arnie. That's it. On earth as it is in heaven. COVID-19 has given us this one great blessing. Ironically enough, it's given us the incentive to re-examine those things that we need to re-examine toward the end that you just spoke of. So there you go.
All right, thank you for that. Cheers, ladies and gentlemen.